I felt it before I even parked. That gut level warning that something wasn't right. Then I turned the corner and saw them. 3 construction trucks barricading my driveway like a steel wall. A dump truck squatted across one side, a landscaping rig blocked the other, and a flatbed hauling a skid steer sat dead center like a final insult. They weren't randomly parked. They were positioned with surgical precision. No way out, and locked behind my garage door sat about $18,000 worth of electrical equipment I needed for a contract starting in 2 hours. Leaning casually on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, was Denise Harper, HOA president, neighborhood enforcer, and a woman who treated bylaws like personal weapons. She noticed me staring and gave a slow, satisfied smile. "Safety precaution," she said smoothly. "We received a complaint about your garage." Right then it clicked. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. What Denise didn't know was that by blocking my driveway, she'd just set herself up for a mistake so big it would cost her everything. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? When I moved into Briar Glen, I wasn't chasing luxury or status. I was chasing peace. 8 months had passed since my divorce, and I needed somewhere steady enough to rebuild a life that had cracked down the middle. Not just for me, for my daughter Lily. She was 14, observant in that quiet way that makes you realize kids see far more than adults think. She didn't complain, didn't ask for much, but I could tell she craved stability. So when I found that modest house on Cedar Ridge Lane, the decision came down to one thing: the garage. It wasn't fancy, but it was wide, clean, and solid. 2 full bays, reinforced outlets, and enough room to store every tool I owned. For an electrician trying to rebuild his business from scratch, that space wasn't just square footage. It was a lifeline. I spent weeks turning it into something precise and functional. Clear bins labeled in thick black marker. Extension cords wrapped tight and hung on hooks. Pegboards lined with tools arranged so perfectly you could tell if one was missing from across the room. Lily helped me install new lighting strips across the ceiling, holding the ladder steady while I wired the switches. We'd spend Saturday mornings out there, her handing me screwdrivers, asking questions about voltage and circuits. The garage became more than a workspace. It became proof that we were going to be okay. The homeowners association didn't seem like a problem at first. A welcome packet sat on my porch the day after I moved in. Cheerful font, friendly tone, a neat list of rules about lawn care and trash bins. Standard neighborhood stuff. The kind of guidelines you expect when you move into a planned community. I skimmed it, nodded to myself, and filed it away. I met Denise Harper during my second week. She walked up my driveway like she already owned it. Posture straight, hair flawless, smile polished enough to belong in a commercial. She introduced herself as HOA president and spoke in a voice so smooth it sounded rehearsed. "Briar Glen prides itself on standards," she said. "We like things orderly." I told her I liked orderly too. I genuinely meant it. Order was my whole life. Wiring systems, tool racks, schedules. I believed in structure. For about 10 days, everything was quiet. Then I replaced my grass. I'd never liked traditional lawns. They drank water, needed constant mowing, and honestly looked boring. So I planted a section of native wildflowers instead, low, growing, colorful, neat, and environmentally smart. It didn't look wild or messy. It looked intentional, balanced, clean. 3 days later, a bright orange notice was taped to my door. "Non-approved landscaping." I thought it was a mistake. So I opened the HOA handbook and checked the landscaping section line by line. There it was in plain language: native plants permitted. I sent Denise a polite email asking which rule I'd violated so I could correct it. She didn't email back. She called. "You don't challenge board decisions," she said, her voice suddenly stripped of all that sweetness. "You comply." I calmly read the exact rule aloud from the handbook. Silence filled the line. Then she hung up. That was the first moment I felt something shift, like stepping onto a stair you thought was there and finding empty air instead. After that, the notices started arriving like clockwork. My work van violated appearance standards because it had a company logo. My trash cans were visible too early in the morning. My porch light was too bright at night. Every single complaint was signed by Denise. At first I told myself she was just strict. Some people are. Some people cling to rules the way others cling to hobbies. I figured if I stayed polite and followed instructions, she'd eventually move on. Then Lily said something during dinner one night that changed everything. "Dade," she asked, glancing out the window, "how come Mr. Calder's truck has a giant logo and nobody complains about his?" I looked. 2 houses down sat a roofing company pickup with bright red lettering across the doors. It had probably been there for years. No warning tags. No violation slips. That's when the pattern snapped into focus. This wasn't enforcement. This was targeting. From that day forward, I documented everything. I photographed my yard every morning, saved every letter, logged dates, times, and descriptions. If Denise wanted a record, I'd keep one, just not for her, for me. Weeks passed, and the complaints grew more ridiculous. One notice claimed my recycling bin lid was angled improperly. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to understand how a lid could even have an angle worth reporting. Still, I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't give her a scene, because patience is powerful when the person across from you expects anger. Anger is easy to dismiss. Calm is harder to fight. I figured eventually she'd get bored. People like Denise usually need constant friction, and if you don't give it to them, they move on to easier targets. I truly believe that. But the morning those 3 trucks appeared across my driveway, engines cold and metal gleaming like a barricade, I realized she hadn't been trying to annoy me at all. She'd been building pressure. And now she was finally ready to see if it could break me. The morning after the wildflower notice, Denise's routine changed. And so did mine. At exactly 8 every day, she began walking past my house with her phone raised chest high. At first I assumed she was scrolling or texting while she walked. Then I noticed the way she angled it. The lens wasn't pointed at her face. It was pointed at my yard. Click, click, click. Not subtle, not discreet. Deliberate. On the 3rd morning I stepped outside just as she reached my mailbox. "Morning," I said casually. She didn't lower the phone. Didn't even blink. "Routine inspection. Daily?" I asked. Her lips curved into a pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Compliance is easier when residents cooperate. That was Denise's specialty. Statements that sounded friendly but landed like warnings. She never raised her voice, never snapped. She didn't need to. Every word she used was polished, measured, and sharpened just enough to cut. I decided the smartest move was to handle it like an adult, no tension, no attitude, just clarity. So I attended the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse smelled faintly like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Folding chairs lined the room, half filled with residents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Denise sat at the front behind a long table, posture perfect. A binder open in front of her, like she was presiding over a court hearing. I waited until public comments were allowed. Then I stood. "I just want clarification," I said evenly. "How are violations evaluated and enforced?" Denise leaned forward slightly, pen poised above paper. "Are you suggesting we're unfair?" Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried that subtle edge, the kind designed to make you sound guilty for asking a question. I'm asking how decisions are made, I replied. She tapped her pen once, twice, slowly. Complaints are reviewed individually. Translation, she decided. I nodded like that answered anything and sat down. The meeting moved on, but I could feel her eyes on me every few minutes. Measuring. Calculating. When it ended, people shuffled out quickly, eager to escape. I was halfway to my truck when someone spoke behind me. "Hey, hold up." I turned. One of the board members, Oliver Briggs, according to the nameplate he'd had on the table, walked toward me. He looked like the kind of guy who avoided conflict as a lifestyle choice. Hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, voice low. "Off the record," he said, glancing around the empty lot. "You're not the first." "First what?" I asked. He hesitated, then said quietly. That word stuck in my head the entire drive home. Not problem, not violator. Target. Over the next few weeks, things started happening that were small enough to deny, but obvious enough to notice. Landscaping crews hired by the HOA began working near my property constantly, not across the neighborhood, not rotating evenly, just near me. Leaf blowers roared at sunrise right outside my bedroom window. Edgers scraped the sidewalk so close to my driveway it sounded like metal teeth grinding stone. Trucks idled at the curb long after the workers stepped away, engines humming like they were trying to rattle the walls. If I stepped outside, the noise stopped. If I went back in, it started again. Coincidence only works until it repeats. Then came the letter that changed everything. It was taped dead center on my front door. Bright white paper practically glowing in the sunlight. I pulled it down and read it once, then again. Complaint of burning odor from garage. Possible fire hazard. Subject to emergency enforcement. My stomach dropped. There had never been smoke, not once. My equipment was professionally inspected every month. My wiring setup was cleaner than most commercial shops. Whoever wrote that complaint either had no idea what they were talking about or knew exactly what they were doing. I called Denise immediately. "This is serious," she said the moment she answered, her voice calm and grave like she was reporting a storm warning. "We have to protect the community." "Who complained?" I asked. "We don't disclose complainants." "Can an inspector verify it?" "That won't be necessary." That was the sentence that made everything click into place. She wasn't investigating a problem. She was manufacturing one. I asked to meet her in person. She agreed, but insisted we talk outside my house. When she arrived, she stood on the sidewalk with her arms folded, scanning my property like she was evaluating a crime scene for evidence. "I just want to resolve this," I said. "Then comply," she replied smoothly. "With what rule?" "With safety expectations." "That's not a rule," I said evenly. Her smile vanished like someone flipped a switch. "You're being difficult." I felt heat rising in my chest, that instinctive anger that shows up when someone twists logic into nonsense. But I forced it down. Anger was exactly what she wanted. Anger would make me look unstable, defensive, guilty. "I'm being careful," I said instead. For a moment, we just stood there, silence stretching between us. Then she turned without another word and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. 2 days later, the trucks showed up, and the second I saw them blocking my driveway, engines cold and parked with surgical precision, I finally understood why she'd spent weeks photographing my garage, documenting my yard, collecting notes. She hadn't been watching. She'd been preparing a story, one where she wasn't the aggressor, one where I was the problem. I stood there staring at those trucks like they were some kind of metal puzzle, and something inside me quietly locked into place. Up until that moment, I'd been telling myself this was a misunderstanding, that if I stayed calm enough, polite enough, reasonable enough, it would eventually sort itself out. But looking at the way those vehicles were positioned with deliberate precision, I knew the truth. Denise hadn't misunderstood anything. She'd orchestrated it. "What safety measure requires blocking my property?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She lifted her coffee cup slightly and gestured toward the trucks, like she was presenting a display. "Containment." "Containment of what?" A reported hazard. "There is no hazard." She gave a small shrug, the kind people use when they've already decided the outcome. "We can't take that risk." The engines were cold. No drivers. No workers. No warning cones or hazard tape. Just 3 massive vehicles sitting there like a barricade designed to make a point. I could feel the pressure building behind my ribs, but I kept it contained. Losing my temper would only give her exactly what she wanted. Proof. Or at least the illusion that I was unstable. "I have a job this morning," I said. "I need access to my garage. Safety takes precedence over employment." She replied smoothly. That sentence told me everything. This wasn't enforcement. This wasn't concern. This was leverage. I stepped past her without another word and walked slowly around the trucks, studying them the way I'd study a faulty circuit panel. Details matter. Details tell the truth people try to hide. The same company logo was printed on all 3 doors in dark green lettering. Harper Grounds Maintenance. Her last name. I pointed at the logo. Family business. Her smile returned instantly, like a light switch flipping back on. Approved vendor. Of course it was. HOA money paying her relatives. Her relatives supplying equipment. Equipment conveniently positioned to intimidate me. The whole thing fit together too cleanly to be coincidence. I didn't argue. Didn't accuse. Didn't even sigh. I just nodded once. "Okay," I said calmly, documenting. For the first time since I'd met her, her expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker of something behind the eyes. Not fear. Not yet. But surprise. She'd expected frustration. Maybe shouting. Maybe a scene she could later describe as threatening behavior. She hadn't expected cooperation. Inside the house, Lily stood at the living room window watching us, her brow creased with worry. When I walked in, she turned quickly. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "No," I said, grabbing my camera from the counter. "We're gathering information." I stepped back outside and began photographing everything. Wide shots, close-ups, license plates, tire positions, the angle of each truck relative to my driveway, the time displayed on my phone screen in frame. Documentation isn't dramatic, it isn't loud, but it's powerful. Facts don't argue. They wait. Denise watched me for a minute, then turned and walked down the sidewalk like she'd already won. I zoomed in on the company phone number printed on the dump truck's door and dialed it. A man answered on the 3rd ring. "Harper Grounds." I said pleasantly. "Your vehicles are currently blocking private access at my address. I'm trying to confirm who authorized that placement." A short pause. Papers shuffling. Management. "Which manager?" I asked. Silence. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Interesting. People hang up for 2 reasons: they don't know the answer, or they know it too well. That afternoon, just as I was finishing labeling the photo files on my laptop, there was a quick knock at the door. I opened it to find Oliver standing there, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the street behind him like he didn't want to be seen. "You didn't hear this from me," he said quietly. I stepped aside to let him in. "Didn't hear what?" He lowered his voice. "Denise never got board approval for those trucks." I leaned against the counter. "Meaning?" "Meaning she used emergency authority without a vote." "Is that allowed?" "Only if there's documented danger," he said. "Like fire reports, structural risk, official complaints, something verifiable." I walked over to the desk, pulled out a folder, and handed him a printed certificate. He read it carefully. His eyebrows lifted. "This says your garage passed inspection 2 months ago." "Yep." He looked back up at me, studying my face like he was reassessing something. "You might want to keep copies of everything." "I already do." He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when a realization settles into place piece by piece. Then he hesitated. "You're not going to yell at her or threaten anything, are you?" I shook my head. "No." "What are you going to do?" I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and met his eyes. "I'm going to wait." Because patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. The loudest person in a conflict usually loses. The calmest one usually wins. And Denise had just made her first real mistake. She thought she was fighting one guy with a garage. She had no idea she'd just started something much bigger than that. That night my kitchen table stopped looking like a place to eat and started looking like a strategy room. I laid everything out in neat rows: violation notices, printed emails, inspection certificates, photographs with timestamps in the corner. Lily sat across from me with a yellow highlighter, carefully marking dates the way a lawyer might prepare evidence for trial. The overhead light cast sharp shadows across the papers, and for the first time since the trucks showed up, I didn't feel stressed. I felt focused. "So," she said, tapping the marker against her lip. "What's the plan?" I leaned back in my chair. "We let her keep going." Well, she blinked. "That's the plan." Whip. It sounded strange out loud, but I meant every word. People who misuse authority almost never stop on their own. They push further. They get bolder. And every step they take leaves fingerprints. All I had to do was let Denise keep making moves, and make sure each one was recorded. The next morning I stepped outside with my camera. The trucks hadn't moved. Same positions. Same angles. Same silent blockade across my driveway, like they'd been welded into place overnight. I photographed them again from multiple angles, making sure the time and date showed clearly on my phone screen in each shot. Day 2, still there. Still there. By day 4, I wasn't irritated anymore. I was curious. Because now it wasn't just harassment. It was a pattern. And patterns, if you follow them long enough, lead somewhere. So I made a phone call. I dialed the county parking enforcement office and asked a simple question in my calmest, most neutral voice. How long can commercial vehicles legally remain parked blocking residential access without a permit? The woman on the line didn't hesitate. 4 hours. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there smiling at the wall for a solid 10 seconds. 4 hours. Those trucks had been there for almost 96. That afternoon I started knocking on doors. Not to complain, not to vent, just to ask questions. I chose 3 neighbors I knew Denise had cited before: Mrs. Alvarez across the street, Mr. Dawson on the corner, and Glenn, a retired teacher who lived directly behind me. I didn't tell them what I thought. I didn't accuse Denise of anything. I simply showed them what I had: photos, letters, highlighted rules. The reactions were almost identical. First confusion, then recognition. Then that slow shift in expression people get when they realize something they once thought was random wasn't random at all. Glenn adjusted his glasses and said quietly, "She did this to me last year." Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms. "Me too." Mr. Dawson didn't even speak. He just nodded once, long and slow. That was all I needed. Pattern confirmed. When I got back home, my phone buzzed. A text from Oliver. "Check section 12 of bylaws." I opened the HOA document and scrolled until I found it. Section 12. The acting president may be removed upon majority petition of homeowners. I read it twice. Then once more just to be sure. Majority meant more than half. Briar Glen had 120 houses. I did the math in my head. 61 signatures. Not easy, but possible. I was still staring at the number when a letter slid through my mail slot with a soft thud. I picked it up, opened it, and felt my eyebrows lift. Legal notice. Denise had filed a harassment complaint claiming I'd been intimidating residents. Temporary restriction order. I was not to approach neighbors for 7 days. Lily watched my face carefully. Is that bad? I folded the letter neatly. No. It means she's nervous. Because confident people don't rush to legal shields. Innocent people don't file preemptive complaints. You only try to silence someone when you're afraid of what they might say. I followed the order exactly. Didn't step onto anyone else's property. Didn't knock on a single door. I stayed home, worked inside, organized tools, and documented the trucks every morning and evening like clockwork. And then something happened Denise clearly hadn't predicted. Neighbors started coming to me, quietly, one at a time. Some knocked after sunset, some stopped by while walking their dogs. Some just slipped folded papers into my mailbox. They'd heard about the trucks, seen the photos, compared stories. Turns out when you push people long enough, they don't stay silent forever. They start talking to each other. By the 6th day, I had a small stack of handwritten statements from residents describing their own run-ins with Denise's rule enforcement. Not complaints, not rants, facts. On the 7th evening, right as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, there was a soft knock at my door. Glenn stood there holding a clipboard. He didn't smile, didn't speak right away. He just handed it to me. "You might want this," he said. I looked down. Rows of signatures, 23 of them. My chest tightened, not from stress this time, but from something I hadn't felt since this whole thing began. Hope, because 23 meant one thing. I wasn't standing alone anymore. Monday morning arrived with the kind of quiet that feels loaded, like the air knows something is about to happen. At exactly 9, the temporary restriction expired, and I stepped onto my porch holding a neat folder under my arm. I hadn't felt this calm in weeks. Not fake calm. Not forced calm. The real kind. The kind that shows up when you know you've prepared. The trucks were still there. 14 days now. 14 days of metal barricades parked across my driveway like statues dedicated to bad judgment. Dust had started collecting along the tires. A thin line of dried leaves had gathered near the curb beneath the dump truck, proof it hadn't moved even an inch. They didn't look intimidating anymore. They looked incriminating. Right on schedule, Denise appeared at the end of the sidewalk, coffee in hand, posture straight as ever. Her eyes flicked from me to the clipboard, resting on the porch table beside me. The one Glenn had delivered. "You're persistent," she said lightly. "I'm thorough," I replied. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a math problem she hadn't solved yet. "You're also under review." "For what?" I asked. "Creating division in the community." I almost laughed out loud. Division. She'd practically invented it. But I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. "I'm actually solving one," I said instead. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that it sounded private but still carried an edge. "You should stop before this gets worse." There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. But close enough that anyone listening would understand what she meant. I didn't answer her. I just pulled out my phone and dialed. Her brow creased. "Who are you calling?" "Documentation." When the dispatcher answered, I spoke calmly and clearly. I reported that multiple commercial vehicles had been obstructing private residential access for 2 weeks without visible permits or authorization. I gave the address, the vehicle descriptions, the timeline. Denise's smile faded while I talked. Not dramatically, just gradually like a light dimming. When I hung up, she folded her arms. "That won't accomplish anything." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. About 20 minutes later, A patrol cruiser rolled slowly down the street, tires whispering against the pavement. The effect on the neighborhood was instant. Curtains shifted. Front doors cracked open. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The air changed. Heavy, electric, like the moment before thunder breaks. The deputy stepped out of the car with the calm, unreadable expression of someone who'd seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable and didn't find any of them surprising. He carried a small notebook and pen, eyes scanning the trucks before he even spoke. "Who made the call?" he asked. "I did," I said, raising a hand slightly. Denise stepped forward at the same time. "Officer, this is HOA enforcement." He nodded politely.
Mom.
"I'll need documentation authorizing these vehicles to block access." She paused. Just for a second. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did, because up until now, Denise had answered every question instantly, confidently, like she'd rehearsed every possible conversation. That pause meant she hadn't rehearsed this one. She handed him a sheet of paper. He read it carefully, turned it over, looked again. His expression didn't change, but his pen started moving across the notebook. "This doesn't list duration," he said. "It's implied," she replied smoothly. The deputy looked up. "Implied isn't legal authorization." Her jaw tightened slightly. He didn't argue, didn't lecture. He simply walked the perimeter of the trucks, measuring distances with steady steps, jotting notes, snapping a few photos with his phone. He checked the license plates, looked at the curb, studied the angle of the flatbed blocking my garage. Methodical, neutral, professional. Finally, he returned and faced us. "These vehicles have exceeded local parking limits by quite a bit," he said. Denise crossed her arms. "They're here for safety." He nodded once, slow and thoughtful. "Then you won't mind explaining that to a county inspector." Her eyes widened, just slightly. Right on cue, another vehicle turned onto the street and rolled to a stop behind the cruiser. White sedan. Official seal on the door. Timing so perfect it almost felt scripted. Across the street, Oliver stepped out of his house, pretending to check his mailbox. As he looked up, he gave me the smallest nod, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. Backup had arrived. The inspector stepped out of the sedan holding a tablet, his expression focused and businesslike. He glanced at the trucks, then at Denise, then at me. No assumptions, just assessment. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. For the first time since this started, Denise wasn't the one controlling the scene. She was standing inside it. And suddenly, the balance of power wasn't tilted in her favor anymore. The county inspector's presence shifted the air. He introduced himself with calm authority, flipped open a sleek tablet, and asked a single pointed question. "Who authorized these vehicles?" Denise's answer came fast, practiced. "Emergency board action." The inspector's gaze flicked to the deputy. "I'll need written authorization and hazard documentation." She handed him the same crumpled paper she had hoped would carry the weight of command. He scanned it, brows knitting, then tapped through a series of digital files. Silence stretched like a taut wire, humming with anticipation. Finally, he spoke. "This document isn't filed with the county." "It doesn't need to be," she said, her tone clipped but trembling just enough to betray nerves. "For emergency obstruction of private access, it does," he corrected, steady, immovable. Her composure cracked, almost imperceptibly, a hairline fracture only visible to a careful observer. I was watching. Also, complaints of hazardous property conditions must be accompanied by inspection reports, he added. Denise's eyes flicked to me. I stepped forward, pulling out my certificate. She could only watch. He read it lips tight, then raised an eyebrow. Recent clearance. The deputy beside him nodded. No visible hazard either. Outside, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the tension. They weren't loud, just present. Shadows and eyes like silent witnesses. Denise tried again. "This homeowner has been disruptive." The inspector's reply was blunt, precise. "That's not relevant to vehicle obstruction." Her mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing left. The deputy scribbled something, tore it from the pad, and handed it to her. "Notice of violation," he said, voice even. "Vehicles must be removed immediately or they'll be towed." Time tilted. Everything shifted. Denise's confidence faltered as she realized the trucks were no longer tools of intimidation. They had become evidence, proof stacked against her. She pulled her phone from her pocket, fingers stiff and deliberate. The whisper that came through it was strained, urgent. A crew arrived within minutes to move the vehicles, but the momentum had already passed. While they worked, Glenn stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Inspector," he said politely, voice firm, "residents would also like to submit this." The inspector took it, thumb tracing the heading. "Petition for removal of HOA president." He looked up, eyes wide. 70, 2 signatures. Denise's face drained of color, the first crack of panic showing. Oliver stood beside me. "Majority threshold is 61? The inspector nodded slowly, methodical. "Then it appears a board review will be scheduled." Denise stared at the sheet like it was written in fire, a silent witness to her unraveling. No shouting, no pleading, only undeniable proof. And proof, as it always does, spoke louder than threats, accusations, or fear. She didn't move. She didn't speak. For the first time, there was nothing left to command, manipulate, or hide behind. The weight of accountability settled over her like a heavy, inescapable fog. The neighbors watched quietly, the tension thick but unspoken, like a held breath waiting for release. The inspector closed his tablet with a soft click, the sound final. The trucks were being moved, the signatures were filed, and Denise's reign of intimidation had fractured, irrevocably. In that silence, the truth had its victory. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was steady, undeniable, and absolute. Every eye on her was a reminder that power, when abused, eventually meets a reckoning. Denise's phone call had summoned action too late. The evidence, the petitions, the community standing together, it was unstoppable. The trucks that had been instruments of obstruction now marked the turning point. They were proof, not punishment, a symbol of order reclaiming its place. She watched, pale and rigid, as the final pieces of her control slipped away. And in that moment, there was no argument, no manipulation, only quiet acknowledgement that the balance had shifted. For the first time, she faced a room where proof was the loudest voice, and it had spoken. The petition, the signatures, the certificates, they were more than paper. They were momentum, unity, and inevitability. The inspector didn't need to raise his voice. Authority was in every measured gesture, every verified fact. Denise had nothing left to wield, nothing left to say. I watched quietly as the tension dissolved into action. The trucks moved, the signatures filed, the community's resolve sealed in ink and witness. Denise's silence said everything. She had been undone not by anger, not by chaos, but by the simple, unshakable weight of evidence. It was over. And yet, the power of that moment lingered, resonating in the quiet acknowledgement that justice, when measured, does not rush. It asserts itself with precision, calm, and finality. She had met her match in procedure, in truth, and in the unwavering observation of those who refused to be intimidated. For the first time, there was nothing left for her to manipulate. Proof had spoken, and proof, in its quiet authority, was louder than any threat she could have made. The trucks were moved. The petitions were filed. The community had witnessed, and Denise, for the first time, had nothing to say. The review meeting came 3 days later in the community clubhouse. I didn't speak a word. I didn't need to. The evidence did all the talking. Parking violations stacked neatly. Unauthorized vendor contracts highlighted in red. Selective enforcement reports. Financial discrepancies Oliver had unearthed quietly, like a detective leaving breadcrumbs. One by one, the board members flipped through the packet as if reading a mystery novel whose ending was already inevitable. Denise sat rigid at the front table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles glowed white beneath the fluorescent lights. Her usual confidence had evaporated, leaving a tension so sharp it could cut through the room. When the vote was called, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no theatrics. Just a simple, deliberate count. 4 votes for removal, 1 abstention, no speeches, no protests, just procedure, steady, unyielding, final. Denise stood, clutched her folder like it was a shield, and walked out without a glance at anyone. That was it. 6 years of authority ended in under 10 seconds. The echoes of her reign didn't linger. They were gone, swept away by the quiet inevitability of truth. Afterward, the board announced immediate reforms. Vendor contracts would require full committee approval. Violation reports would be reviewed by multiple members, not just the president. Emergency powers would be strictly limited to verified hazards, backed by documented inspections. The landscaping contract with Harper Grounds was suspended pending a full audit. Outside the clubhouse, neighbors lingered in small, scattered groups. Their voices weren't raised in gossip or complaint. They were processing, digesting the shift that had quietly reshaped their community. Mrs. Alvarez pulled me into a hug. Glenn shook my hand firmly, pride in his eyes. Even people I'd never met nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement of shared victory. Lily squeezed my arm. You didn't even argue. I didn't need to, I said, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Because sometimes winning isn't about volume. It isn't about fury or confrontation. Sometimes it's just documented, irrefutable, visible in black and white. Over the following weeks, Briar Glen transformed, not in its structures, but in its spirit. The houses looked the same. The yards looked the same. Yet the atmosphere was lighter, freer. Conversations carried further. Laughter threaded through the streets like music. A pressure valve had opened, releasing the weight that had pressed on everyone for years. And the wildest part, wildflowers began appearing in lawns throughout the neighborhood. Not just mine, but on blocks I'd walked past every day. No violation notices, no whispered threats about unauthorized plantings. Just color, growth, and life, stubborn and uncontainable. It was a subtle revolution, one that didn't need a battle cry, just the steady, unassailable proof of fairness and transparency. People felt empowered, not because someone had yelled at them or punished Denise, but because they realized they had a voice that mattered, that could be heard when paired with evidence and courage. Even the silence had weight. Each neighbor who smiled, each conversation that lingered longer than it had before, was a testament to the shift. The fear that had hung over Briar Glen, invisible but heavy, dissipated like mist in the morning sun. Denise was gone from authority, but the changes were enduring. Procedures were written, approvals required, emergencies verified. The trucks that had once blocked driveways were a distant memory. They were symbols now, markers of what happens when community stands together and documentation carries truth. I walked past a neighbor planting daisies, another kneeling by a cluster of lavender. Children ran through yards, unafraid of stepping on a patch that might once have drawn a reprimand. The streets smelled of fresh grass and soil, of spring breaking through the confines of control. Briar Glen had returned to itself, yet better, safer, freer. And in the quiet triumph of documentation, I realized that battles aren't always won with shouts or confrontation. They are won with patience, preparation, and unyielding evidence, leaving the oppressive powerless and the community restored. And sometimes, The simplest victories are the most profound. A neighborhood smiling, wildflowers blooming, peace settling like a soft blanket over streets that had long forgotten what it felt like to breathe easy. It was over, and it had never needed to be loud. The proof had spoken. The neighborhood had answered. Life, color, and fairness had returned, and Briar Glen, at last, felt like home again. Looking back, I don't think the trucks were the worst thing Denise ever did. Not really. Blocking my garage was just the moment everything became visible. The real problem had been there all along. Quiet pressure, selective rules, the weight of fear that kept people from speaking up. The trucks didn't create the conflict. They revealed it. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to run my business, raise my daughter, and live in peace. But sometimes peace isn't something handed to you. Sometimes it's something you have to protect, piece by piece, with patience and persistence. What I learned is simple. Authority only works when people believe in it. The second it stops being fair, it starts to crumble. Not because someone tears it down intentionally, but because everyone quietly stops holding it up. My garage looks the same now, tools lined up, lights bright, Lily asking questions as I work. But the street outside feels different. It feels like a neighborhood again, not a courtroom. Conversations flow easier, laughter travels farther, and even the wildflowers have returned. Small things, but they make all the difference. Honestly, I'd go through every bit of that stress again if it meant ending things the right way. Standing for what's fair, even quietly, changes more than just one house. It changes the whole block. If you want more true stories like this, hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?